And
It says
Iman,
you
do you need to do it too?
have to give permission.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, good. I have a very yappy Sheltie in the background. So hopefully he will not be too talkative. He just came back from a walk and he's all riled up at the moment. So want somebody to play with him. He's a California dog adjusting to being in Florida. All right, so let's see. So I hope you all see the slide. Dear friends, again, reminding you, we are now at the last bit of this amazing book. Shoghi Effendi wrote two very long letters that were book length. One is Advent of Divine Justice, which he published, I think, in what, 1937? And then The Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, which was addressed to all the Baha'i communities in the West, which he sent out in 1941, in March of 1941, when World War II was going really bad. The Nazis and the Japanese were winning. The last book he would write is, of course, God Passes By, which was a history. After this particular book that we're studying now, he would no longer do a very long commentary. So this is his last long commentary. He certainly wrote many other wonderful letters after this, but not going into the kind of depth that he does in Promise Day Has Come. And of course, what we're going to deal with tonight is where he's taking all of this history he's given us and the understanding of where religion is going and where the world is going and why the situation of the world is so bad. And now he's going to really be more specific and sort of bring it up to date. And you will see that even though he's talking about the world in 1941, it's all of what he has to say is as true today as it was then. So we're going to start the section called The Three False Gods. You will recall the last two sessions, he talked about Islam in one, and the next was all about Christianity. And he talked particularly about the role of the clergy of both and why they also are responsible for the terrible situation in the world. And it's not just the political leaders who are. So, Imam, can you read this first one, please?
Yes. This vital force is dying out. This mighty agency has been scorned. This radiant light obscured. This impregnable stronghold abandoned. This beauteous robe discarded. God himself has indeed been dethroned from the hearts of men, and an idolatrous world passionately and clamorously hails and worships the false gods, which its own ideal fancies have fatuously created, this misguided hand so impiously exalted.
So there was a German philosopher who famously said, God is dead. Obviously, God wasn't dead, but God, he was saying in a much more blunt way what the Guardian was saying. God himself has indeed been dethroned from the hearts of men. Do any of you find that to be true today?
Absolutely. Everywhere.
Yeah. In fact, the largest group of people in the West now are the nuns, people who have no religion. So he's now going to talk about what have we put in place of it, the three false gods. So, Sarush, can you read this, please?
The chief idols in the desecrated temple of mankind are none other than the triple gods of nationalism, racialism, and communism, at whose altars governments and peoples, whether democratic or totalitarian, at peace or at war, of the East or of the West, Christian or Islamic, are in various forms and in different degrees now worshipping. Their high priests are the politicians and the worldly wise, the so-called sages of the age. Their sacrifice, the flesh and blood of the slaughtered multitudes. Their incantations, outworn shibboleths and insidious and irreverent formulas. Their incense, the smoke of anguish that ascends from the lacerated hearts of the bereaved, the maimed, and the homeless.
Wow. So what do you think of the Guardian's statement here? The triple gods of nationalism, racialism, and communism. In the desecrated temple of mankind.
I am, when I heard this the first time or read it the first time, I was surprised that he didn't say materialism. But, so I had to really think about it. Nationalism, communism, what was the other one? What is it?
Racialism.
Racialism, of course. Outworn, okay, shibboleth is a very interesting term.
Yeah,
Something obsolete.
right.
They're clinging to obsolete thinking. But of course, communism itself isn't really an old thinking process. So there is something more underlying. That's the root of these three, which is basically, I think,
Go ahead.
the last part that I really like. Where did it go? Smoke of anguish. Hold on. Yeah, who's all? I don't know. You were gonna say something. You're gonna.
Communism today is basically socialism, but forcible socialism, the means of production owned by the community. Racialism, it's actually astounding to those of us who lived through the civil rights period of the 60s to see that there is a movement now, like on college campuses, to have all dorms that are only for brown or black people, to start segregating again because people need to be with their tribe, with everyone's being judged based on their race. Nationalism. Nationalism's a little easier for us to see, but my country.
But how can you have nationalism and racialism coexist in the same place? Is that possible? Like I can see if it's like Japanese or how highly nationalistic, and anybody who's not Japanese is always considered an outsider, even if they've lived there for 20 years. Or maybe that would be more considered racialism. But if you're, if it's, for example, the United States is a nation, can you have nationalism and racialism exist at the same time? I guess you can have a subset that is racist and, pro-America. And then but then that would be ironic. Then you can have another subset in the group that is either racist or not, but is also pro-America. Like you have to always put something, you have to create an order of importance. You have to rank what is higher, nationalism or racialism for you?
Well, you can
if you live in a place like China,
three.
communism is not a choice, huh?
You can be all three. You can be a communist nationalist who also wants to promote your own race. I mean, the Chinese right now, the ruling group in China are the Huns. It's an ethnic group. I mean, a racial group or ethnic group. And they have lots of other peoples, different races and ethnicities within China. It's actually an empire. South Africa, you had the Black South Africans, the white South Africans, and the Asians. You had people who had come from India. So you have all these different racial groups, even within many different countries or tribes. So there are all these competing loyalties. There may be agreement on the nationalism, and that if you're all South Africans as opposed to Ghanaians, but within South Africa, you also have these racial loyalties, and then you have economic loyalties in terms of what your economic philosophy is. And so people have, as he says, it doesn't matter whether you're talking a democratic or an authoritarian government, whether you're a peaceful country or one at war, whether it's East, West, no matter what the religion of the area is, these three triple gods of nationalism, race, and economics or communism, they are taking people's loyalties, and they often act as though like a religion. They have their high priest who are the leaders of those groups. You have the sacrifice that you give up for your country or your race or your economic system. They have their flags and their rituals and insidious and irreverent formulas. And the anguish is that from all the trouble that they create is their incense. It's incense is a kind of smoke. It creates a smell. And he says that these three strong movements create the smoke that is manifested as the anguish that descends upon the people who are hurt by these movements. So we have to remember that when we start promoting any one group, nation, race, or economic system, and the problem with communism and socialism is that in order to have the means of production owned collectively, you have to take it away from the current owners, and that almost never happens without violence. So these three are tremendous causes of mischief and heartache, even if they sound like they're wonderful on the surface. Let's see, Donya, can you read this next one, please?
The theories and policies so unsound, so pernicious, which defy the state and exalt the nation above mankind, which seek to subordinate the sister races of the world to one single race, which discriminate between the black and the white, and which tolerate the dominance of one privileged class over all others. These are the dark, the false, and the crooked doctrines for which any man or people who believes in them or acts upon them must sooner or later incur the wrath and chastisement of God. Movements is the warning sounded by Abdu'l-Baha. Newly born and worldwide in their range will exert their utmost effort for the advancement of their designs. The movement of the left will acquire great importance. Its influence will spread.
So this is also a very amazing paragraph. Any thoughts on it?
We're definitely seeing the movement of the left acquire dominant importance right now.
It's happening in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially in California.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the progressives, what we refer to as the progressives in this, and wokeism. This is part of the movement of the left. Deifying the state, exalting the nation above mankind. So remember in 1941, think of the old newsreels you've seen of Hitler and how the Nazis made the state of Germany. They deified the state. They made it like a church, like a religion.
Mm-hmm.
Subordinating the sister races of the world to one single race. Well, of course, that was also a big part of what the Nazis were doing. They wanted blue-eyed blonde people to run the world. Discriminating between the black and the white. the dominance of one privileged class over all others. And ironically, in communist countries, this is exactly what happens, but it happens in many other countries as well. We're seeing that now, and actually the dominant class in the United States, the privileged class, are the people with the most education as well as money. So it's become a matter of education and as well as money in terms of being a part of a privileged class. So these movements were something that Abdu'l-Baha talked about, predicted coming, and that the Guardian saw so clearly even 80 years ago. What do you think about this? Does this challenge you and challenge some of your thinking about what's going on in the world right now? I see the wheels spinning in Justin's head.
I know a lot of
No, I was
people.
just rereading.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Justin?
No, I didn't have much to say. I was just rereading it. That's why I was
Okay,
just.
that's good. Yeah, good. Okay, Shaheen?
I know a lot of people, if they're, let's say, single and they're looking for a prospect, will measure the person's worthiness based on the profession and amount of money that that person makes.
Right.
And that's very prevalent.
Yeah. You know, the United States likes to think it doesn't have a class system, but it does. Every culture, every country has a privileged class somewhere running things. So the Baha'i faith is the opposite. He says, contrasting with and irreconcilably opposed to these war engendering, world convulsing doctrines are the healing, the saving, the pregnant truths proclaimed by Baha'u'llah, the divine organizer and savior of the whole human race. Truths which should be regarded as the animating force and hallmark of his revelation. The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens. Let not a man glory in this, that he loves his country. Let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind. Ye are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch. Some of this now is very familiar. Bend your minds and wills to the education of the peoples and kindreds of the earth, that haply all mankind may become the upholders of one order and the inhabitants of one city. Ye dwell in one world and have been created through the operation of one will. How at this point in the 9-year plan are we bending our minds and wills to the education of the peoples and kindreds of the earth? Isn't that really what the 9-year plan is about? Children's classes, junior youth, study circles, devotionals. Isn't this how we're going to educate the peoples and kindreds of the earth? Elevated conversations, discourse. This is exactly what you're saying we have to do. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's correct. When you first asked the question, I was thinking in contrast to the last 5-year plan. So that's why I don't know what exactly you're trying to ask, but yeah.
Yeah. So just we're continuing what we know is going to work. You know, one of the things I love is the analogy in the faith where it says we are the yeast. So when you have a ball of dough that's going to be a loaf of bread, you don't really see the yeast. It's just mixed up in there. But these tiny little animals are what they burp, and that's what makes the yeast dry, the loaf of bread rise. It makes the magic that makes bread. We are those tiny little animals that are going to raise that big loaf of mankind up into something healthy. The weakened pillars of religion. Iman, can you read this, please?
Not only must irreligion and its monstrous offspring, the triple curse that oppresses the soul of mankind in this day, be held responsible for the ills which are so tragically besetting it, but other evils and vices, which are for the most part the direct consequences of the weakening of the pillars of religion, must also be regarded as contributory factors to the manifold guilt of which individuals and nations stand convicted. The signs of moral downfall consequent to the dethronement of religion and the enthronement of these offspring idols are too numerous and too patent for even a superficial observer of the state of present-day society to fail to notice.
Any thoughts on this? Irreligion is not just being atheist. It can also mean not caring about religion, being completely oblivious of religion. So he says irreligion and its offspring, these triple curses of nationalism, racialism, and communism, which come from not having a religion, these are oppressing the soul of mankind and must be held responsible for the ills which are so tragically besetting it. But he says there are other problems that all come from the fact that we don't have strong religious belief, including which must be regarded as contributory factors to the manifold guilt of which individuals and nations stand convicted. The signs of moral downfall, which are a consequence of not being religious, and the enthronement of nationalism, racialism, and communism. He says this is, even superficial observers will be able to connect the dots on here. Now he's getting into specifics. Shaheen, can you read this?
Actually, not at this point. I'm driving now. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So Sarush, can you read this one, please?
The spread of lawlessness, of drunkenness, of gambling, and of crime, the inordinate love of pleasure, of riches, and other earthly vanities.
We're not hearing you all of a sudden, Sarush.
In the rising tide of divorce, in the deterioration in the standard of literature and of the press, and in the advocacy of theories that are the very negation of purity, of morality, and chastity. These evidences of moral in the West, permeating every stratum of society, and instilling their poison in its members of both sexes, young and old alike, blacken still further the scroll upon which are inscribed the manifold transgressions of an unrepentant humanity.
Well, as bad as things were in 1941, let's go through this list and think about them 80 years later. Spread of lawlessness, of drunkenness, of gambling, and of crime. The inordinate love of pleasure. Inordinate means excessive love of pleasure, of riches, and other earthly vanities. The laxity in morals, revealing itself in the irresponsible attitude towards marriage, in the weakening of parental control, in the rising tide of divorce, in the deterioration in the standard of literature and of the press, and in the advocacy of theories that are the very negation of purity, of morality, and chastity. These evidences of moral decadence invading both the East and West, permeating every stratum of society, and instilling their poison and its members of both sexes, young and old alike, blackens still further the scroll upon which are inscribed the manifold transgressions of an unrepentant humanity. I mean, he's just not mincing words here, is he? The Guardian is just laying it out. What do you think of his list?
I think all of these that are listed, you can see them in today's society. Like,
Right.
you can think of examples of each one, and like that's happening today.
Right. And some of these are obvious: lawlessness, crime, drunkenness, inordinate love of pleasure. He says inordinate love of pleasure. It's okay to love pleasure, riches, and earthly vanities a little bit, but not excessively. That's what inordinate is. Laxity in morals, weakening of parental control. Young people don't care what their parents think. Deterioration in the standard of literature and the press. In the newspapers and the press have just become basically echo chambers of political parties. And literature is, the standard of literature is awful, essentially, you know, the kind of stuff people read. Advocacy of theories that are the very negation of purity, of morality and chastity. Evidence of moral decadence. What do you think he's talking about where he says the advocacy of theories that are the very negation of purity, morality, and chastity? Well, how many of you have heard, it's my body, I should be able to do with it whatever I want? Right? If it feels good, do it. Used to be the expression when I was in college. If I'm not hurting anybody else, what difference does it make?
I definitely don't like that illogical statement.
Yeah.
Because Guardian says man is organic with his environment, which means that whatever you're doing, you can't isolate yourself and saying, oh, what's the difference if I'm not harming myself or harming, if I'm not harming others, because you're actually harming yourself. And so your surroundings need to think about that as being a form of suicide, right?
Right. Right.
We rescue people from physical suicide, but we don't really rescue them from spiritual suicide.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Oops.
I just wanted to add that in the book Portals to Freedom, there's one entire chapter dedicated to marriage, which I feel like a lot of people don't really talk about. And chapter 7 is called, these chapter names are really long, but it's called Marriage Under the World Order of Baha'u'llah, an Eternal Bond, the Wedding, the Need for Reformation of Laws Pertaining to Divorce, the Laws of Baha'u'llah, Four Kinds of Love, the Children of the New Day. And it's not a very short chapter, but you know, this chapter 7 is all about, kind of dedicated to marriage. Howard Colby Ives talks about, this is the book, it's gonna blur it, but Portals to Freedom. He actually tells a story of Abdul Baha officiating, you know, a marriage while he was in the U.S. I think he might have also officiated the marriage between Louis and Louisa Gregory.
Right.
but I'm not sure if this, I don't think this was the same marriage.
Right.
But this was a great chapter, and actually he talks about, the rates of divorce, which since then, I mean, this book was written like in 1930 something, and since then, I think divorce has gotten actually a lot worse.
Right.
Yeah, this was 1937, January 7th, 1937, it was completed. So divorce has gotten, a lot worse, and I was trying to find it and I couldn't find the statistic that he gave. Based on my recollection, I thought that he, gave a number like, so and so number of marriages end up in a divorce. But I'm very sure that since then it's actually gotten a lot worse. I
Yeah.
think maybe at some point it was in the 30s, the percentage of
Mhm.
marriages that result in divorce. So definitely, I mean, this rising tide of divorce at the time of writing was still rising, it was still not at its height. So I think, it's very much a rising tide.
Right. And it has devastating effects, particularly on the children in the family. And it leads to particularly women being financially constrained as they get older and so forth because of divorce. So it's yeah, it's not harmless.
And it's even been leading to people, losing faith in the institution of marriage. So
Right.
many marriages end in divorce, so why do we need it? Why we
Right.
probably shouldn't get married anyway. It's
Right.
probably going to end in divorce anyway, so why get married?
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a huge topic. You're speaking to a divorce lawyer. So um, I've spent a lot of time thinking about all this, but we know that, for example, the greatest predictor of if a person finishes high school, gets married, and waits until they're married to have a child, they are most likely to never end up in poverty if they follow those, except in, you can have times like the Great Depression where everybody ends up in poverty, but generally in a normal economic period, if you finish your high school education, wait till you get married, and then have children, you are most likely to never end up in poverty. And if you don't end up in poverty, your kids are more likely to have a good start in life. So, these are very important. Baha'u'llah gave us the laws and standards of behavior for our own good. And when you see them break, then you find out the consequences. Baha'u'llah said, in this day the taste of men have changed, and their power of perception hath altered. The contrary winds of the world and its colors have provoked a cold and deprived men's nostrils of the sweet savors of revelation. So when humanity turns away from his revelation, we get disaster. Sorry, my cursor. So, Donya, can you read this, please?
The flames which his divine justice hath kindled, cleanse an unregenerate humanity, and fuse its discordant, its warring elements as no other agency can cleanse or fuse them. It is not only retributory and destructive fire, but a disciplinary and creative process, whose aim is the salvation, though unification of the entire planet. Mysteriously, slowly, and resistlessly, God accomplishes his design, though the sight that meets our eyes in this day be the spectacle of a world hopelessly entangled in its own meshes, utterly careless of the voice which for a century has been calling it to God, and miserably subservient to the siren voices which are attempting to lure it into the vast abyss.
Any thoughts on this?
I think this is kind of echoing some of the, first couple paragraphs that we were reading. I mean, I think this is pretty close to the end of the
Right,
letter, but mysteriously, slowly, I feel like this is almost like verbatim, kind of the introduction to this letter.
right. So he's bringing us back around, so that this is not only what's going on in the world. These terrible situations are not only punishment for turning away from God and his teachings and destroying things, but it's disciplining mankind, and is also creating at the same time something wonderful. Creative process whose aim is the salvation through unification of the entire planet. It's mysteriously, slowly, and resistlessly happening. In other words, we can't stop this. It's not happening as fast as we may wish, but this is God's way of making his will on earth. Justin, can you read this, please?
Yeah. God's purpose is none other than to usher in ways he alone can bring about, and the full significance of which he alone can fathom. The golden age of a long divided, a long afflicted humanity. Its present state, indeed, even its immediate future, is dark, distressingly dark. Its distant future, however, is radiant, gloriously radiant, so radiant that no eye can visualize it.
And then there are quotes that he, the Guardian uses so many quotes that basically say the same thing. But there's subtle differences in each one. And if we had lots of hours, we could look at each one and see what is he saying here that he didn't say in the previous sentence. But we're just going to hit the high points. So we know he said to E.G. Brown, the Orientalist from Cambridge University, when he met with him, these fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. These strifes and this bloodshed and discourse must cease, and all men be as one kindred and one family. Soon will the present day order be rolled up and a new one spread out in its stead. After a time, all the governments on earth will change. Oppression will envelop the world, and following a universal convulsion, the sun of justice will rise from the horizon of the unseen realm. So let me read part of this again. After a time, and this is Baha'u'llah himself saying this, all the governments on earth will change. Oppression will envelop the world. And following a universal convulsion, the sun of justice will rise from the horizon of the unseen realm. What do you think? Pretty scary, huh? If your lifetime happens to be when the oppression will envelop the world and there's a universal convulsion. And there's no reason to believe it won't happen in our lifetime.
I have a question. In the previous slide, Baha'u'llah writes that the most great peace shall come. But I
Yes.
thought we don't know for certain that the most great peace shall come. I know at some point he wrote, since you have refused this, the most great peace, hold fast unto this, the lesser peace, or something to that effect.
Well, if we go to some later slides, you will see even more about the most great peace.
Okay.
So, yeah, good point. The Guardian's going to answer that. And then Abdul Baha is saying basically the same thing, that we, all kindreds and nations, will become a single nation. Religious and sectarian antagonism, the hostility of races and peoples, and differences among nations will be eliminated. All men will adhere to one religion, will have one common faith, will be blended into one race, and become a single people. All will dwell in one common fatherland, which is the planet itself. It's a little easier for us right now to think about this, having seen things like Star Trek, right? The future unification of the planet. But to many people, the idea that the whole planet would adhere to one religion and be blended into one race is not a welcome thought.
It's definitely not a welcome thought. It wouldn't be a welcome thought at an interfaith meeting.
No, it would not be. Yeah. And now he's going to explain the process that God works with. So what we witness at the present time during this gravest crisis in the history of civilization. And this is again World War II, the gravest crisis in the history of civilization, is the adolescent stage and the slow and painful evolution of humanity, preparatory to the attainment of the stage of mankind, the stage of maturity. You've probably heard this idea before. And that this is characteristic of being a youth. But never fear. The ages of its infancy and childhood are past, never again to return, while the great age, the consummation of all ages, which must signalize the coming of age of the entire human race, is yet to come. The convulsions of this transitional and most turbulent period in the annals of humanity are the essential prerequisites and herald of the inevitable approach of that age of ages, the time of the end, in which the folly and tumult of strife that has since the dawn of history blackened the annals of mankind will have been finally transmuted into the wisdom and tranquility of an undisturbed, a universal and lasting peace, in which the discord and separation of the children of men will have given way to the worldwide reconciliation and the complete unification of the diverse elements that constitute human society. You know, one of the things that I was thinking about is, it's like God created the species of man and set certain points where the species would suddenly take a giant leap forward. Just like our own bodies hit puberty and suddenly go through radical changes in a relatively short period of time. Mankind has always been created as a species, so that at this point in its development, it would make a giant change, just like we do in puberty. There's nothing a 12-year-old has to do to say, oh, I've got to suddenly mature physically. Your body just does it. So I often think about that in terms of the first day of Rizwan, where he says all things were created new. It's like suddenly mankind hit puberty on the first day of Rizwan. And that's why we are in this convulsive stage, the period where you get pimples, where you get growth spurts, and your bones sometimes ache, and you're awkward, and your speech changes, and it's a mess. That's where we are, right? Congratulations, you got to be here during the adolescence of mankind. This is the fitting climax of the process of integration. And now he's he's going to explain how progressive revelation and the development of mankind work together. So first you have the family, the smallest unit of human organization. Then you have the tribe. Next, the nation state. Think ancient Athens, city of Singapore, the nation, and finally, the unification of the whole world, the final object and crowning glory of human evolution on this planet. This is the last stage of ordering mankind, which we are now paving the way for. It is with this stage that the fortunes and the purpose of the faith of Baha'u'llah are indissolubly linked. It is the creative energies which his revelation has released that have instilled into humanity the capacity to attain this final stage in its organic and collective evolution. Remember, on the first day of Rizwan, he remade humanity, giving humanity new capacity. You can be much more spiritual in this day than the saints and messengers that came before Baha'u'llah. You as an individual have that because he has given that capacity to humanity. His new world order, the structure of his new world order, now stirring in the womb of the administrative institutions he himself has created, will serve as a pattern and a nucleus of that world commonwealth, which is the sure, the inevitable destiny of the peoples and nations of the world. So when you look at that local spiritual assembly of yours, which is having a hard time getting a quorum and sometimes can't seem to get its act together, you have to understand that this is the seed that is going to create the pattern for the government of that locality, of the National Assembly of that nation, of the House of Justice for the whole world, the inevitable destiny of the people and nations of the world will be patterned on our administration. Iman, can you read this, please?
Just as the organic evolution of mankind has been slow and gradual and involved successively the unification of the family, the tribe, the city-state, and the nation, so has the light vouchsafed by the revelation of God at various stages in the evolution of religion and reflected in the successive dispensations of the past, been slow and progressive. Indeed, the measure of divine revelation in every age has been adapted to and commensurate with the degree of social progress achieved in that age by a constantly evolving humanity.
This last sentence is really interesting. Did you pay attention to that? So each dispensation, each divine messenger, what they reveal is equal to, measurable with, the degree of social progress that will be achieved in that age. So Baha'u'llah came with the Industrial Revolution. So his revelation is commensurate with, in proportion to, how much of a quantum leap humanity is taking at the same time. Oops. Okay, make sure. It has been decreed by us, explains Baha'u'llah, that the word of God and all the potentialities thereof shall be manifested unto men in strict conformity with such conditions as have been foreordained by him who is the all-knowing, the all-wise. Should the word be allowed to release suddenly all the energies latent within it, no man could could sustain the weight of so mighty a revelation. Think how much we don't know, how much God has not allowed us to know. And then this is just Abdu'l-Baha further explaining the same thing, that every aspect of creation has a maturity, a point of maturity, and that mankind is the same. As a collective group, we are like a one body passing through all the stages, childhood, youth, adulthood, and so forth. And he says this again, Abdu'l-Baha, that which was applicable to human needs during the early history of the race can neither meet nor satisfy the demands of this day, this period of nudeness and consummation. You know, we can't judge the past based on today's standards because today's standards are higher. Baha'u'llah has changed our understanding of the world and the standards of behavior of mankind. Humanity has emerged from its former state of limitation and preliminary training. We must now become imbued with new virtues and powers, new moral standards, new capacities. New bounties, perfect bestowals are awaiting and already descending upon him. So think about it, friends. Not until the coming of Baha'u'llah did any religion condemn slavery. Not until the coming of Baha'u'llah did any religion condemn slavery. Mankind accepted it. We didn't think of it as a spiritual and moral wrong. We accepted the oppression of women until the coming of Baha'u'llah. There are many things that we now worldwide accept as a new standard that did not come about in religion until the coming of Baha'u'llah. Man must now become imbued with new virtues and powers, new moral standards, new capacities. Imam, can you read this, please?
In every dispensation, he moreover has written, the light of divine guidance has been focused upon one central theme. In this wonderful revelation, this glorious century, the foundation of the faith of God and the distinguishing feature of his law is a conscience of the oneness of mankind.
Now he's going to explain that further. So he says, first of all, let's go back and use as an example Jesus's dispensation. Jesus's central theme was the necessity of inculcating a high standard of morality and discipline into mankind. But he spoke primarily to mankind as individuals, rather than as component parts of one universal, indivisible entity. At that, then he goes on to explain further that during Jesus's time, the whole surface of the earth wasn't explored, and the possibility of organizing the peoples of the earth and nations into one world government couldn't be envisaged. I mean, they didn't even know that parts of the world existed. So when Jesus says, come after me and I will make ye fishers of men, and now Baha'u'llah is able to say, come ye after me that we may make you become the quickeners of mankind. Now, friends, what was on these two slides is very important to understand when you're teaching a Christian. Because if their whole orientation is to Jesus and his teachings, Jesus was teaching them how to be a moral, spiritual individual. He was not talking about collective transformation, social transformation. So their orientation is not to that at all. And we have to understand that as we help them expand their vision. Now, with Islam, we had the concept of a nation as a unit. So he brings the idea of organizing a nation state. He organized the people of the desert, the Arabs. This was a new period of spiritual teachings. And so Baha'u'llah makes this statement saying, hearkening back to Islam, of old it hath been revealed love of one's country is an element of the faith of God, but now we say it's love of mankind. But that's as far as Muhammad could go during his lifetime. It was unattainable during Muhammad's lifetime to even think about a world government. And then I found this last part of the second sentence in this paragraph to be very interesting. The conception of nationality, the attainment to the state of nationhood, may therefore be said to be the distinguishing characteristics of the Mohammedan dispensation, in the course of which the nations and races of the world, and particularly in Europe and America, were unified and achieved political independence. So the highest, he's basically saying, to, in my interpretation of the Guardian here, is that he's saying that the highest manifestation of the Muslim dispensation occurred in Europe and America with the establishment of the United States and the countries in Europe. And they weren't even Muslim, they were Christian countries. I mean, the irony is that is just amazing when you think about it. But that is one of the fruits of Islam. We know, by the way, that some of the sailors with Christopher Columbus were Muslims, and that there are a number of Muslims who did come to the United States in the early days, but they weren't the driving force. Whoops. So this is somewhat repetitive here. Abdul Baha's talking about how until we knew more about the world, we couldn't possibly have talked about world unity. And he says, even if he's speaking in his own lifetime, for none is self-sufficiency any longer possible, inasmuch as political ties unite all peoples and nations, and the bonds of trade and industry, of agriculture and education are being strengthened every day. Hence, the unity of all mankind can in this day be achieved. And then he goes on to talk about the 19th and, well, the century of light. I guess you could be the 20th century. Of this past ages have been deprived. For this century, the century of light, has been endowed with unique and unprecedented glory, power, and illumination. Eventually, it will be seen how bright its candles will burn in the assemblage of man. And then he gives us these 7 candles of unity. This is from a talk he gave in Scotland. So the first is the unity in the political realm, which we're starting to see. The European Union is a good example of this. The attempt at the League of Nations and now the United Nations, and all these international bodies that are starting to come up with treaties that have the force of law. Unity of thought in the world of undertakings. We're seeing increasing unity of thought in the world about, well, for example, I talked earlier about slavery. Slavery still very much exists in the world, but it's no longer tolerated. There are international efforts to stop it because there's a growing consensus that it's a bad thing. The idea that the whole world has to deal with the environment and that we have to come together to, as a world, to solve the problems of the environment. There's growing unity of thought. So there are many things that we could pull out as examples. Unity and freedom. Right now, it looks like we're sort of going backwards in that, but the desire for freedom has become universal. Unity in religion, which is the cornerstone of the foundation itself, and which by the power of God will be revealed in all its splendor. By the power of God, it will be revealed in all its splendor. We don't really see that at the moment, in my mind. Stop me when you have something you want to say. Fifth candle is unity of nations, a unity which in this century will be securely established. Well, we don't have a world government, but the United Nations is increasing. There's increasing international organizations, and the United Nations are in many ways moving us in that direction. Unity of races and unity of language. The choice of a universal tongue in which all peoples will be instructed and converse. Any thoughts on these 7 candles of unity?
I have a thought. I think it might be a tangent and lead to kind of a, well, my thought is unity of language. We talk about how, kind of the reduction of all the world languages to a single language or two, at least a lingua franca for everyone. And my thought is that, we see in this view, I mean, you could say that kind of the extinction of some, a lot of languages would be a good thing, um, aside, the preservation aside, preservation of culture and poetry and literature and all that, eventually the aim is for there to be kind of a universal language.
Right.
And, there's people who are, very much trying to preserve a lot of languages, like Kevin Locke, who recently passed away.
Right.
He was part of some kind of, let me see, Lakota Language Consortium,
Right.
a nonprofit organization dedicating to preserving the language. I mean, he was fluent in Lakota, and he was a board member for this consortium. So someone like Kevin Locke, knowing that this is one of the principles of the faith, obviously he saw something in the preservation of this Lakota language, in order to put so much efforts into trying to preserve the language and preserve, I guess that aspect of its culture. So for me, it's like a little bit of a conflicting kind of thing where we see, there's so many languages in the world that I think somewhere in New Zealand, or New Zealand as a country, has like 9% of the world's languages concentrated in one country, just because of the sheer number of tribes and, various Aboriginal, in Africa, I know each tribe, like Uganda, they have multiple different national languages. So over time, inevitably, they say every couple minutes or so, a language dies, this might be like factually incorrect. And I hope I'm not making up data, but I want to say every day for sure, at least every day, a language dies. So, I mean, this is just, it's interesting. To some people, it's extremely sad, but it's just like a conflicting thing for me. It's like, how does these things reconcile? This extinction of many languages, the preservation of the languages, and the knowing of the fact that eventually we're aiming for, one world language, and that I mean, to me, it seems like we're kind of saying here that languages dying off is not a bad thing, I mean, you can translate things into other languages, let's say English was to die off, you could still translate everything to other languages. It wouldn't be true to the source. It wouldn't be exactly a one-to-one translation, but it would still be, preserved in a way. And I mean, people could always learn it, there are the materials. Like we could still learn Latin, I have books that teach you Latin. We wouldn't be able to necessarily learn the perfect accent pronunciation of Latin from the book, I don't think. Or maybe we could get close, but I don't know. To me, it seems like this is like a very, I mean, Baha'u'llah kind of seems to be suggesting that the extinction of all these, thousands of languages is kind of a good thing, maybe?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, because we know that the universal auxiliary language is eventually going to become the universal language. And if you can converse with everybody in the auxiliary language, why are you going to retain a second language? You might for a couple of generations just to keep some connection with your past or the past of your people, but they're not going to keep it for very long, because if the whole point of a language is to communicate. And if you can't communicate with your language, then you have no need for it. I mean, there's that wonderful statement where Baha'u'llah is actually, I think, trying to be a little funny, where he says he met with somebody and the man talked about how he had learned 6 or 7 different languages, and Baha'u'llah said, "Oh, well, you wasted your time." We have this idea because we talk a lot about unity and diversity, but we're going to essentially have unity through homogeneity. The whole world now wears t-shirts, jeans, and some sort of tennis shoes or flip-flops, right? There are very few places in the world where those aren't part of what people wear. Okay, so all the lovely ethnic costumes that we like to pull out for festivals, nobody wants to wear those anymore, except some old grandmothers in a few remote places. The old ladies in Bolivia with the cool hats and the dresses based on the Spanish conquistadors, in Bolivia, great. But when they're gone, their granddaughters are going to be wearing jeans, or probably already are wearing jeans and t-shirts, right? The whole world has pizza parlors, sushi, all these things that may have started off as an ethnic food have been homogenized and accepted. The whole world eats kebab now, right? And falafel. So the unity of languages is just inevitable. And there are millions of languages that have already died. So the fact that that process is continuing at an accelerated rate shouldn't surprise us.
And my statistic was wrong. Google says every 14 days a language dies, and more than half of the world's 6,900 languages are at risk of dying out by the end of the 21st century.
That sounds good. Sounds about right. And it's too bad, but I think fortunately we have a lot of linguists, people with PhDs going around with tape recorders who are trying to memorialize the last speaker of whatever language. But Mr. Furtan, people used to ask him how many languages he spoke, and he said, well, there are hundreds, I think he used to use the 900 as his number. He said there are 900 languages in the world, and of those I only speak 5. But I saw a statistic in National Geographic that there are more native Portuguese speakers in the world than there are native French speakers. And that when you get down to native speakers, there are only about 5 major languages in the world. So anyway.
Kathy, I had 2 things. One, I remember I think Adib Tarza has said that the maturity of mankind will be reached when 3 things happen. I think we talked about it before. It was like the unity of language was one of them.
Right.
The kingship would be no longer wanted, something that's pursued, and then also I think it was using chemical reactions to create gold. I think that's what's the
turning copper into gold.
Yeah, turning copper into gold. Yeah,
Right.
that was so that reminded me of what we were talking about. But also, we talked a lot about, the different unity of religion, unity of language, unity of nation. I brought this up with people who aren't Baha'i, and that don't know anything about the faith, right? And they say, well, a lot of them have told me, like, I think they use humanitarian is the word they use. They're saying like how you're different from a humanitarian. I forgot the term that they use, but I've heard that a lot when you say, unity of the world, unity of that's something.
Well,
Yeah.
we scare people. When we talk about a world government, unity of the world, and we have lovely aspects that would be part of that, the elimination of prejudice, the equality of men and women, and so forth. But when we say it will be a spiritually based world government, a theocracy is essentially what it will be, based on a religion, that scares them. Because previous attempts to have theocracy and current ones like the government of Iran are very scary.
I think even right now, a lot of Baha'is aren't aware that this is an inevitable requirement for maintaining unity and order in the world.
Right.
This idea of separation of church and state is required right now because we've been studying this whole time that these religions are outworn shibboleths, and so are the secular ideas that are replacing them.
Right.
Whether it's nationalism, communism, or racialism, or being an atheist or an agnostic, anything. So,
right.
And I do think that ties into, Baha'u'llah's vision is so great that we might squirm at the idea of a reduction in the number. Sorry about that. We might be squeamish about the idea of losing languages, but one should also maybe ask the other direction. Like, well, how many languages is enough? 900, 1,000, 10,000, 10 million? Like, how much diversity does?
Right.
How much diversity is actually diversity, right?
Right.
So you can't really do that. Things like look at this for example. How long has humanity been in this form on planet Earth relative to the age of the Earth? We are, if you liken the existence of planet Earth as a 24-hour clock, we landed for just we're here for less than a second. The dinosaurs ruled for, what is it, like 130 million years or something like that, right?
Right.
Then, and how long have we even existed? It's nothing. And the dinosaurs, with all their glory and pomp, and we worship them in museums, or at least we like to see them, they're all extinct. So these mass extinctions have happened multiple times on planet Earth.
Right.
And is it a boohoo thing? Well, yeah, because there's no more T-Rexes, but this is also part of the plan of, well, what replaced the T-Rex, right?
Right.
God will eventually, like this entire universe, as vast as it is, will eventually undergo heat death, and everything that's in it will have to regather to spawn a new universe. Does that mean that the world does have a beginning, or the universe does have a beginning and end, as Abdul-Baha says? No, the two are not in conflict.
Right.
The universe, as Abdul-Baha says, has no beginning or no end, but that doesn't mean that subsections of it are not constantly coming and going.
Right.
There are stars being born and there are stars dying. There are planets around those stars being born and planets around those stars being destroyed. There are civilizations that come and civilizations that will go. In fact, humanity will ultimately culminate in its own extinction as well.
Right.
Our soul will continue, but a human being in this form on this planet will cease to exist. This is an inevitability.
Right.
We must accept that the diversity of languages is just a smidget of a greater plan where the remnants of those languages will still persist. One can take comfort. One. Number two, it's not stopping anybody in the future from, remember, we're going to have a future where we don't have to have so much of our workday expended on paying taxes for things that cause destruction, right?
Right.
So we work 1 or 2 hours. We are free to after we, sleep and whatever, to pursue whatever we want. Some of that will be pursuit of our, it's all our own personal growth, art, sports, deepening in the faith, the writings, prayer, meditation. Who is to say that you can't, if you want, study a language on your own?
Right.
Surely, for example, Arabic and Farsi, even if we do reduce the world scripts to one language, there's still two languages in which Abdu'l-Baha wrote, right? So
Right.
there's going to be interest in that. If someone wants to learn about the Lakota or whatever, we must also remember that we are thinking in what is possible or achievable in 2022. Who is to say that there isn't an AI bot that can't converse with you in another language should you wish it, on
Right.
some kind of a, holographic medium or world, or a society that wants to do that? It's a matter of precedence, or not precedent, priority. Baha'u'llah's vision is that, look, the first thing we need to do is to unite. If we don't unite, our ability technologically to destroy ourselves is becoming exponentially greater. And if we do destroy ourselves, there will be zero humanity and zero languages.
Right.
We can't have that.
Right.
So he says that the prerequisite, or even Abdullah talks about this, a major barrier of nations being at, having distrust is that they don't, there's something about learning, like hearing something in a language that you learned when you were a child. It seems to go more straight to your heart rather than have to be processed so much. That imagine world leaders, when they do speak one language and they do have one culture, they will regard each other as one kin, and then they cannot see this idea of us versus them.
Right.
Like, for example, Putin is interested in invading into Ukraine because he thinks that Ukraine is part of Russia or part of his own thing. He's trying to bring back his own, people to the fold, if you will, whether they like it or not. But look who he's not going after. He's not going after some obscure island off the coast of Argentina, right?
Right.
Not interested. It's not in his radar because that sense of unity is beyond him.
Right.
And he's doing it in the wrong means, but that's not the point. We must trust the manifestation of God, that the certain things that may even right now on the surface appear to us as sacrifice have a far richer yield than in the future. Even the idea of a homogeneity of what we look like or how we are, if we think if we go back to, people will wear their tribal clothing in Papua New Guinea for particular celebrations, let's say. But
Yeah.
at the same time, they're wearing these T-shirts because it's practical. They're wearing shoes because it's practical. So we have to look at those ceremonial dresses in whatever country as those were born of necessity. It was out of necessity, and then to some degree of luxury, people were able to add nice little colors and flares or whatnot. But they were born nonetheless of necessity. And then a new culture will form. Like right now, well, it's America that dictates, or France that dictates fashion or not. But all these things have incorporations of elements in it from the past. But right now, it's ostracized. If I were to wear something that might have feathers, people will wonder, well, are you Native American? No. Well, then why are you wearing this? I forgot that word that would be associated with it. It's seen as a bad thing. It'll be seen as racist or something like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
appropriation, yeah. But in the future, that will be acceptable. Why? Because it's that the Native American is my extended family member. So what if I want to wear something that my cousin likes to wear? I like it. I want to wear it too. So
Well,
this
is
idea.
all-
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry.
So anyway, I'd like to move on a little bit from this because we're getting off on a tangent and we're very close to finishing. So I'd like to do that this evening, but thank you for that. By the way, I heard in Haifa that Abdu'l-Baha commented that the Punjabi that women wear in India would later be adopted worldwide because it would be considered both beautiful and practical. So, we can't see where it's going. But it is for people who are very caught up in some aspect of their ethnicity or their race, race and ethnicity often go together, but a current culture and are afraid of losing it. It's going to happen anyway, but the Baha'i faith is just saying it's okay that it's going to happen. And here, this is reiterating a lot of this. Abdu'l-Baha says one of the great events that's going to happen, which is to occur, is the hoisting of the standard of God among all nations. So all nations will be Baha'i. By this is meant that all nations and kindreds will be gathered together under the shadow of this divine banner, which is no other than the lordly banner itself, and will become a single nation. All men will adhere to one religion, will be blended into one race. All will dwell in one common fatherland, which is the planet itself. You know, I think about this like with Jesus standing there at the Sea of Galilee with these illiterate fishermen saying, guess what, folks, there are going to be churches on the other side of the planet named after each and every one of you 2,000 years from now. I mean, they wouldn't have believed it, right? So what is a church, they'll ask. So through the power released by these exalted words, he hath lent a fresh impulse and set a new direction to the birds of men's hearts, and hath obliterated every trace of restriction and limitation from God's holy book. So now we're going to talk about nationalism. A word of warning. Remember, with each one of these, he has reminded us after the Guardian has reminded us after his discussion, for example, of the clergy and so forth, Christianity, about the kingship, that as much as he's condemning the abuses of these, that we are not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So a word of warning, the love of one's country has not been either condemned or disparaged. So we are disparaged, of course, means being regarded as of little use. It should not, indeed, it cannot be construed as a repudiation or regarded in light of a censure pronounced against a sane and intelligent patriotism. Nor does it seek to undermine the allegiance and loyalty of any individual to his country, nor does it conflict with the legitimate aspirations, rights, and duties of any individual state or nation. So if people in the Brittany part of France want to wear their interesting lace hats and dance around a maypole, that's fine with us, so long as they have both the loyalty to that as well as the loyalty to mankind. All it does imply and proclaim is the insufficiency of patriotism in view of the fundamental changes affected in the economic life of society and the interdependence of the nation and the contraction of the world. So today, it's not enough to love your country. It's okay to love your country. It's okay to love your city, your state, your neighborhood, but you have to have the greater loyalty in addition. It calls for a wider loyalty, which should not and indeed does not conflict with lesser loyalties. It lays through this loyalty which it inspires and this love which it infuses, the only foundation on which the concept of world citizenship can thrive. It does insist, however, on the subordination of national considerations and particularistic interests to the imperative and paramount claims of humanity as a whole. So the fact that the people of Spain love to eat seafood to the degree that they would fish the oceans until no fish were left, they don't get to do that because they have to live in a world with everybody else, right? The world is, in truth, moving on toward its destiny. The interdependence of the peoples and nations of the earth is already an accomplished fact. The revelation of Baha'u'llah has, in his own words, lent a fresh impulse and set a new direction to this vast process now operating in the world. The fires lit by this great ordeal are the consequences of man's failure to recognize it. However, he also reminds us of this great irony that the calamities that are going on are hastening the unification of the world. Adversity, prolonged, worldwide afflictive, allied to chaos and universal destruction, must needs convulse the nations, stir the conscience of the world, disillusion the masses, precipitate a radical change in the very conception of society, and coalesce ultimately the disjointed, the bleeding limbs of mankind into one body, single, organically united and indivisible. So now the last section of the book, which is only about 4 paragraphs. So Justin, can you read this, please?
Sure. To the general character, the implications and features of this world commonwealth, destined to emerge sooner or later out of the carnage, agony, and havoc of this great world convulsion. I have already referred in my previous communications. Suffice it to say that this consumption will, by its nature, be a gradual process and must, as Baha'u'llah has himself anticipated, lead at first to the establishment of the lesser peace, which the nations of the earth, as yet unconscious of his revelation and yet unwittingly enforcing the general principle which he has enunciated, will themselves establish.
So the lesser peace, the nations of the world are going to do something. They're going to probably, most likely, create something that's better than the United Nations, but also treaties, because we're going to be too scared to keep using nukes and other weapons against each other. Dunya, can you read this, please?
This momentous and historic step involving the reconstruction of mankind as the result of the universal recognition of its oneness and wholeness will bring in its wake the spiritualization of the masses, consequent to the recognition of the character and the acknowledgement of the claims of the faith of Baha'u'llah, the essential condition that ultimate fusion of all races, creeds, classes, and nations, which must signalize the emergence of his new world order.
So we're going to have peace first, and then we're going to have the spiritualization of the masses. It won't be the other way around. So when we have the recognition of the oneness and wholeness of mankind, that's when mankind will wake up to the need for the spiritual. Does that make sense? Iman, can you read this, please?
Then will the coming of age of the entire human race be proclaimed and celebrated by all the peoples and nations of the earth. Then will the banner of the most great peace be hoisted. Then will the worldwide sovereignty of Baha'u'llah, the establisher of the kingdom of the Father, foretold by the Son and anticipated by the prophets of God before him and after him, be recognized, acclaimed, and firmly established. Then will a world civilization be born, flourish, and perpetuate itself. A civilization with a fullness of life, such as the world has never seen, nor can as yet conceive.
And when I was first to Baha'i back in the 70s, we used to sit around and think about what the Baha'i world would look like in the future. But he says we can't even conceive of it. It will be a fullness of life we can't conceive of. And once it's born and flourishes, it will keep going. It will perpetuate itself, it says. Then will the everlasting covenant be fulfilled in its completeness. the everlasting covenant is that God will not leave man without guidance, will not leave man alone. Then will the promise enshrined in all the books of God be redeemed, and all the prophecies uttered by the prophets of old come to pass, and the vision of seers and poets be realized. Then will the planet, galvanized through the universal belief of its dwellers in one God and their allegiance to one common revelation, mirror within the limitations imposed on it the effulgent glories of the sovereignty of Baha'u'llah. So even then, we won't be able to fully shine as much as Baha'u'llah within the limitations imposed on it, but his revelation will be put into effect, shining in the plenitude of its splendor in the Abha paradise, and be made the footstool of his throne on high, and acclaimed as the earthly heaven, capable of fulfilling that ineffable destiny fixed for it from time immemorial by the love and wisdom of its creator. So God, when he set mankind in motion, also fixed for it from time immemorial its destiny. Shaheen, can you read this?
Yes. Not ours, puny mortals that we are, to attempt, at so critical a stage in the long and checkered history of mankind, to arrive at a precise and satisfactory understanding of the steps which must successively lead a bleeding humanity, wretchedly oblivious of its God and careless of Baha'u'llah, from its Calvary to its ultimate resurrection. Not ours, the living witnesses of the all-subduing potency of his faith, to question, for a moment, and however dark the misery that enshrouds the world, the ability of Baha'u'llah to forge with the hammer of his will and through the fire of tribulation upon the anvil of this travailing age, and in the particular shape his mind has envisioned, these scattered and mutually destructive fragments into which a perverse world has fallen, into one single unit, solid and indivisible, able to execute his design for the children of men.
Sarush, can you read this last paragraph, please?
Ours rather the duty, however confused the scene, however dismal the present outlook, however circumscribed the resources we dispose of, to labor serenely, confidently, and unremittingly to lend our share of assistance in whichever way circumstances may enable us, to the operation of the forces which, as marshaled and directed by Baha'u'llah, are leading humanity out of the valley of misery and shame to the loftiest summits of power and glory. To the beloved of God and the handmaids of the merciful throughout the West. Shogi.
All right, so we've been on this journey for some months. Any thoughts about these last sections of the Guardian and his call to us?
That's definitely inspiring. I mean, these last few pages, I think, especially, I want to go back and read them a couple more times, you know. I mean, there was a lot of historical information in this letter, but um, there's, you know, those parts of it that put things into perspective and remind us, you know, of kind of where we are. Kind of gets our head in the right space in terms of, you know, how much how much more there is, you know, to know about, or how much more lies in the future of humanity.
Any other thoughts about not just what we've gone over tonight, or anything that we've, you know, how this amazing work of the beloved Guardian, how it's anything that jumped out at you or affected you in the course of going through this?
I wish everybody would study this thoroughly. Maybe you can do this class over and over again for new waves of people, Kathy. Actually, ideally, you would want each one of us to be able to do what you're doing, and then in turn, spread it to more and more people.
Right. Actually, I thought about assigning sections to various ones of you to ask you to prepare, which would probably been a better thing to do. But I learned, even though this is not the first time I've read this, I've read it, I don't know how many times, but I get new things out of it each time I look at it. The Guardian, if you can summarize the ideas in here in probably 8 or 10 pages, but he chose not to give us 8 or 10 pages. He chose to give us the size of a small book. And there is repetition in it, but the repetition is because he wants to make certain points really clear. So, we need to trust him that he knows what he's doing when he gives us all these words to study. And he's so careful with how he says things. But this last, if you went back and reread nothing but this last paragraph over and over again, ours rather the duty, however confused the scene, however dismal the present outlook, however circumscribed the resources we dispose of. And that clause he's talking about, think of how small our Baha'i communities are, how little money we have, how small our resources are to be able to do very much. To labor serenely, confidently, unremittingly. Unremittingly means you don't give up. To lend our share of assistance in whichever way circumstances may enable us. To the operation of the forces which, as marshaled and directed by Baha'u'llah, are leading humanity out of the valley of misery and shame to the loftiest summits of power and glory. So Baha'u'llah is causing all these movements and forces to bring about his will, God's will on earth. And we just have to figure out what our share is in helping him do that. Is it running a little children's class for 3 kids? A study circle for some new believers? Talking to our friends about the faith? That may be what our share of assistance is, but we should do it serenely, confidently, and unremittingly, even if everything else is falling down around us.
I really can't imagine anybody who's who really truly believes Baha'u'llah is a manifestation of God think that what he has deigned to do will not actually happen.
Yeah. Somebody had to build the foundations of all the great cathedrals. And the workmen who built those foundations didn't get to see the soaring towers and the stained glass windows and the multitudes come in. They got to see the dirt and the muck and the rough stones. And that's kind of where we are, right? So he's giving us a vision and also showing us in this book that God is the God of history. He changes the courses of dynasties, the courses of nations. We have to trust him. So any more thoughts?
It's been a great past few months. Thank you so much. I've looked forward to this every week.
Well, thank you. I look forward to being with you folks. I'm going to miss you. So.
This is my family. Family.
Yeah.
Kathy, sorry, just quickly, I wanted to tell you, I forgot to tell you because I think I've seen you once since then. I recently was in Chicago for this Hogenson conference. And while I was there, I I was visiting the bookstore at the temple and I picked up one of these. Oh, you can't see it. It's
All
blurry.
right, yeah,
You
good,
can,
good. Well, I hope you'll read it. My book
oops,
on Horace Holly,
yeah.
which will explain the administration and the history of how things develop organically. But I'm excited that the next one that's coming out is on Roy Wilhelm, which will be coming out, I hope, sometime in the next few months. It's being edited right now, so good. Well, let me know how you like it, Justin.
Okay, I haven't started. I'm in the middle of like 3 other books right now. No,
I understand.
5 other books right now, but I'll get to it.
Yep. Good.
Thank you, Kathy. So maybe we'll take a break and then maybe we can start another study again with you. That would be good.
Well, you just tell me when you're ready. I realize, I've found this also just with even in my own community facilitating study circles, is that there seem to be short periods of time, like between September and Thanksgiving, where people are sort of available. And then they're not available for about 6 weeks. And then they're available, from early January until Nowruz, and then they're not available again. I mean, it's sort of hard to find the right, and particularly I know that a number of you are students. So once school got started, that changed people's schedules. But it's whatever you'd like to do. If I can be of assistance, I would be delighted.
Okay, thank
Tell
you.
those who couldn't continue with us every single week, and I know Katya's life has been changing, and Martine's, give them my regards and tell them we missed them when they couldn't come.
Yes, for
We
sure.
did, we did Advent of Divine Justice before this one, right? I think.
World Order.
World
Order.
Order.
No, it was World Order. You're right. We did World Order. We did Promise to. Well, how about Advent of Divine Justice then? I don't know, but I think I really like studying. The letters of the Guardian. Anything. What about Citadel of Faith? I don't know. I think I think the Baha'i world seriously needs to deepen on the writings of the Guardian.
Yeah.
And start to be able to make wise decisions when they see certain things happen in the world, and so that national and house doesn't have to keep writing letters telling us, reminding us, don't do it like this, or you can do it like this unless that happens, then you gotta have to, so much headache.
Advent of Divine Justice, I know, has been studied a lot, particularly the last couple of years, as part of the most challenging issue, although the book is primarily about teaching, is the primary theme. The racism is one aspect of it, but that's in his explanation of the problems of American society. He also talks a great deal about morality. But Citadel of Faith, most of the other books are compilations of letters addressing particular things. And one advantage to having done the book on Horace Holly, because he put most of those compilations together, put the subtitles in, and wrote the introductions. So I had to really look at all those books as a result. And I also usually know what the letters are about, the background of them. One other possibility is I'm currently rereading again and again Secrets of Divine Civilization, which is very timely right now with Iran, what's happening in Iran. But it's universal, of course. It's basically his explanation of government and society. And it was written when he was, Abdu'l-Baha was only in his early 30s, and while he was with his father. So Baha'u'llah himself probably was directing what Abdu'l-Baha is saying in Secret of Divine Civilization. So
I vote for that one. All in favor, say yay.
yeah, it's I think would be a little faster than this one, but it's amazing. It's written in a language that's much more easy to read than the Guardians. So anyway, but Secret of Divine Civilization is fabulous. I'd be delighted to do that one. Being a politics junkie.
I want to do that one.
Well, you folks consult among yourselves. Just let me know. I'm available. At least at the moment, I think I'm available, so we'll see.
Okay.
All right, dear friends. Carry on and keep up the good work. And I hope I'll see some of you or all of you soon. And I guess Martine is usually my contact, so you decide what you want to do, and if I can help, I'll be delighted.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Yeah,
We
thank
love
you.
you, Kathy.
Kathy.
Thank you. Love you guys.
Thank you, Kathy.
Love you too.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care.
Great day.
Bye.